All right, so what we want to do today is fly some instrument approaches at different configurations because there are situations where you may be going into an airport like Class Bravo or busier than Jacksonville, Class Charlie, where there's airline traffic. So, if you're, for example, we were talking about the sort of cookie cutter way of training students to fly a VFR traffic pattern in a Cessna 172, for example, where, okay, we're on the downwind with no flaps at, 90 knots, then we're turning base, we're gonna be in the white arc, put in our flaps, and then maybe go to 80, and then we're gonna turn final, and we're always gonna put full flaps and come in at 60 to 70. But you're not always gonna use full flaps, right? There are
Nope.
cases where you might intentionally choose not to use full flaps. What's the most obvious example of when you might choose to not use full
Yeah.
flaps in the VFR traffic pattern?
Most obvious is going to be crosswinds, strong crosswinds or gusting conditions.
Yeah, gusty winds, right? Not because you couldn't, just because it doesn't really feel good. Even the POH says you may want to consider, they don't say it's prohibited, right? There's no wind limitation on using the flaps, but they kind of gently hint that, yeah, it might not be super fantastic if you use full flaps in really gusty conditions. You may want to consider adjusting that, right? So it's at least alluded to in the POH, but a lot of times when instructors are teaching students, it's like they get very focused on just doing it one way, the same way, every time. Now, when you're initially teaching somebody how to fly the pattern, yeah, you have to give them some baselines, right?
The parameters, yeah.
Yeah, just some place to start, but then eventually you want to say, okay, now that you've kind of got the basic idea of what's going on here, remember that just like with everything else in life, you have to make adjustments. You can't be so, rigid in every situation. And so we can, transpose that now into the IFR world. So I wanted to talk about a couple examples where that might be the case as well. You really want to make sure that you practice these configurations in VMC so that at the end of the instrument approach, you're comfortable landing the airplane. And you probably remember me saying this the last time we flew, right? You're flying along, scanning, you're doing all your things, IFR, everything looks cool. But then eventually you're going to break out of the clouds and have to land this thing on a runway and deal with everything you normally have to deal with if you hadn't been in a cloud 30 seconds ago, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times there's a disconnect between the instrument approach and the landing, because the instrument approach, the instrument approach is going to be completely pointless if it ends up in a missed approach because you bunged up the landing.
100%, yeah.
Right. So what we want to try and dive into today is how do we make choices as a pilot, and this is going to be different for each pilot in each airplane, but just like everything with AQP, right? We want to give some thought to what we're doing before we go do it so that we can have the best outcome.
For sure.
So in this scenario, we want to give some thought as to, in a given scenario, what configuration in this airplane is going to give me the best chance of landing this thing on the first try without having to go around. So let's say we're landing, and the order of operations for today, and I got a briefing already, and I'll review it with you.
Sweet.
We're going to file IFR just because it looked like there could be some clouds out there. There might not be, but it looked like there was a chance, so we'll go ahead and file.
Cool.
We'll run up to Jacksonville International and we'll do the ILS for runway 8. Then after that, we'll shoot over to Fernandina Beach and we'll do the RNAV approach to runway 13. And then we'll come back to Craig and we'll shoot the RNAV to 14, and we may or may not circle depending on what the wind is doing. So, as you know, Jackson International isn't a super busy Class Charlie airport, but it's busy enough. At a much busier airport, Class Bravo, let's say you've made the choice to go into someplace like Atlanta or Charlotte, or a much busier airport than we have here in terms of airline traffic. That's something to consider. I remember when I was commuting from DC to New York in a Cessna 172 to go visit my parents before they retired down here, when I lived up there. And the airport that I used up in New York was Westchester County Airport. Now, it's a Class Delta, but very, very busy, and they have airline service now.
Oh, nice.
A lot of airline service. So it's not uncommon at all for you to be squeezed in, and they've got like 3 flight schools there or something. So there's just a huge mishmash.
Yeah.
So it wasn't uncommon for me to, get vectored on an approach going into Westchester and for them to say, give me your best forward speed to the marker. Sometimes they would say, to the outer marker.
Yeah.
Or to a 2-mile final, something like that, because you have an airliner behind you. Now, these airliners are doing what on final? Do you have any idea? Some people might
It's like
not.
150, isn't it?
Yeah, about 150, right? And the best we can do, if we're at like full throttle, hauling the mail, is about 110, maybe 120.
At the most, yeah.
At the most, right?
Depending on the conditions, too.
Right. Yeah. And that would really be pushing it, right? So this guy is at VREF, his final approach speed in his airliner. And here we are like, flooring it, trying to not get run over. And it's the controller's job at an airport like that to manage that because, the controller should see, okay, this guy's doing 110, this guy's doing 150. So that's their job to work that out. But we have to keep in mind that if we're going to play, if we're going to accept that, if the controller says maintain a speed, we have to be willing and able to comply. Otherwise, we're going to get booted off the approach. They're not going to make Delta go around just so we can
definitely going to make us go around.
Diddle along at 70 knots on final. So we want to practice shooting our ILS at Jax International at 100 knots with no flaps. And the idea would be we don't want to make any configuration changes below 500 feet AGL.
Okay.
Okay, so, and that's sort of a good rule of thumb in general, whether you're flying VFR or IFR. You want to have everything stabilized. And in the IFR land, we want to back that out further, right? If we're in IMC on an instrument approach, we don't want to make any configuration changes after crossing the final approach fix. Whatever configuration we choose at the final approach fix, we want to be willing and able to follow that through all the way to the MDA or the decision altitude and then land that way.
With that configuration.
Whether that's flaps, no flaps, whatever, we want to be able to just hold that nice and steady because that's going to give us that stabilized approach. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll fly that approach at Jax fairly fast, and we're going to ask for a stop and go. Hopefully we'll get it. If we don't, then we'll maybe try and do a pretend of this at Fernandina or back at Craig, but I'd like to kind of run through the scenario and let it play out. So we'll ask for a stop and go because what I want to see is if we're at that configuration and at 200 feet, right, at decision height, we should be able to throttle back, and again, without changing the flaps, we just want to throttle back, decelerate, and touch down before the 1,000-foot marker, before on the 1,000-foot marker. And with practice, and if you're ready for it, it is possible. But you have to remember that you're not aiming for the numbers here in this situation. No. It's a long runway. We've got, how long is the runway at Jax? Runway 8 is 10,000 feet long, right? So if we touch down at the 1,000-foot marker, we've still got 9,000 feet ahead of us. So no worries about running out of runway over there.
It shouldn't have any.
Right. But now, if we take that to the opposite extreme, there's a little airport up in Maryland where I used to fly and train called Clearview Air Park.
Okay.
And it's a tiny little guy, but they have 2 instrument procedures there. There's an RNAV approach to runway 14 and a VOR alpha approach. They've got a really cool little FBO airport, cheap gas. Take a note at the runway length, 1,840 feet.
Yeah, you might not want to be shooting that at 100.
No, right? If you fly that approach, and you're on final, short final at 100 knots, you are not landing. I'm not even sure if anybody utilizes any of these approaches for real. I have no idea. But all I'm saying is that if you were going to actually fly one of these approaches to minimums, you have to really think hard about your airplane configuration. So the instrument approach going into this airport, the final approach fix, you're at 2,400 feet, and then your MDA is about 560 feet AGL. So imagine you're on, if you break out on final, and now you've got this tiny little postage stamp runway ahead of you, right? If you're doing 100 knots or even 90, it is not going to work, right?
No, not unless you change your configuration.
Not unless you change your configuration, and you don't want to do that, exactly. So you really don't have any choice but to fly this approach at 70 knots with 20 or 30 degrees of flaps. So the way I thought we might mimic that here in the Jacksonville area in sort of a non-towered airport situation is by doing this RNAV approach to runway 13 at Fernandina Beach. So we want to pretend that it's 2,000 feet long, so we're going to sort of, again, you hit the nail on the head, a good visual is where runway 22 and 13 intersect. That's approximately the runway length we're trying to visualize.
Yeah.
So in this case, you have to slow down deliberately on final, right, and maintain that speed and be comfortable with it, and then touch down as close to the threshold as possible, because if you don't, you may not be able to stop before the end of the runway, right? And then the last scenario to come back home here, we'll do the RNAV approach to runway 14 at Craig. This will be sort of the happy everyday scenario, right? Again, if we're thinking of what configuration would give us the best chance of landing the first time around with the least amount of work.
Great, Tower Scout 1790 Zulu Whiskey, holding short runway 5 at Bravo, ready for takeoff.
739 Zulu Whiskey, correct tower, hold short runway 5, working here high for release.
Holding short runway 5, 739 Zulu Whiskey.
9 Zulu Whiskey, runway 5, clear for takeoff on departure, turn left, heading 280.
Zero.
You're clear?
Cool. Turn.
Number 9 Zulu Whiskey, left turn to 280, contact departure 124.9.
Left turn 280, contact departure 124.9, 179 Zulu Whiskey. 179 Zulu Whiskey, 1,800, climbing 3,000, heading 20.
Number 739 Zulu Whiskey, Jax, advise Foxtrot plan ILS 8 today.
I said plan for ILS 8, so I can go
Number
here.
9 Zulu Whiskey, radar contact approach 127.0, checking on the heading.
127.0, checking on the heading, 7 times Whiskey.
Let's try and establish 100 knots in cruise right now.
Okay.
And just maintain that the whole way. He doesn't care about our airspeed right now, but...
Number 9 Zulu Whiskey, turn right, heading 350, descend and maintain 2,000.
350, descend, maintain 2,000, 7 Zulu Whiskey. Altimeters are set, DMS 70 knots, lane light on, make sure Rich will turn on carpet as needed.
739 Zulu Whiskey, you're 3 miles from the final approach 6, turn right heading 050, maintain 2,000 until establishment of localizer, cleared ILS, Yankee runway 8 approach.
Jack Tower, Sky 739 Zulu Whiskey with you on ILS 8.
November 739 Zulu Whiskey, Jax Tower, runway 8, clear for the option.
Yeah, so just like at Craig, clear for the option means we could do a stop and go. He doesn't have a whole lot of traffic going on.
Yep.
All right, awesome. And again, I know this is maybe the first time you've tried doing this, so we'll just kind of talk it through.
Cool.
We're simulating that there's, you know, an Airbus or somebody behind us, and Tower has told us to maintain best forward speed. That's not the case right now. There's no rush. We've got 10,000 feet of runway. We just want to try. The runway's right below that little scattered layer on short final. Kind of an interesting,
Kind of cool.
cloud day.
All right, we're 1,000 above the edge.
Good. And so really what we're interested in is how far down the runway will we touch down and when will we come to a stop. Just do your best to make that happen in the smoothest
Sounds good.
way possible with no pressure to do any particular thing. We'll just see what happens.
Tower, Delta 2569, hold short runway 8, fully ready to go. Delta 2569, Jax Tower, hold short runway 8, traffic 1.5 mile final. Hold short runway 8, Delta 2569.
The runway?
Top runway in sight.
Good.
500 above DA. We'll maintain the speed down to DA.
Get there, you're just going to pull the power to idle and smoothly decelerate.
How much above DA? Above DA. Ooh.
Done. Alright, we're almost there. Hi, Delta.
Alright, we're at DA, so power back to idle.
Yep. And you're just landing an airplane.
As Caleb continues his descent, notice the black tire tread marks in the center of the runway just before the aiming point, commonly referred to as the 1,000-foot marker. This is where most aircraft are touching down at the conclusion of an ILS approach. The area between 500 and 1,000 feet from the runway threshold is called the touchdown zone.
Gently stop. We came to a stop in 3,000 feet. That's pretty good.
Not bad, not bad.
Right, and you were cleared for the options. You can go whenever you're ready.
050, we'll maintain.
So we're heading to Fernandina Beach. We're going to do the RNAV 13, and this time our configuration,
90, contact Jack Center.
Caleb, is going to be 70 knots and 20 degrees of flaps on final.
133.7.
Simulating the shorter runway, high traffic volume at a non-towered airport, one or both of those situations, and we need to slow down to maximize our chances of landing on the first try.
Sounds good to me.
Number 739 Zulu Whiskey, after completion of this approach, you going back to Craig after this one?
Yes, sir. After this approach, we'd like to go back to Craig, 739 Zulu Whiskey.
Zulu Whiskey, thank you. After completion of your approach, lighting 180, maintain 3,000, and return to frequency. Number 739 Zulu Whiskey, you're 3 miles from Joe Buck, cross Joe Buck at 3,000, cleared RNAV, runway 13 approach, Fernandina Airport.
Cross above Joe Buck at 3,000, clear for RNAV 13 into Fernandina, 739 Zulu Whiskey. So let's see if we can get the weather.
Scattered. Temperature 24 Celsius. Dew point 22. Altimeter 3017.
Runway heading 130. Mission Rich. That's on.
And I have the runway in sight.
Awesome.
Shining out there in the morning sun.
Absolutely beautiful.
I know, it's gorgeous this morning.
I love flying in clouds.
What I call happy IFR.
Approach lane checklist. That checklist fall near you. Under my chair. No. Not gonna stress over that. Get out to set.
Whiskey, change advisor frequencies approved.
Change advisor frequencies approved, 739 Zulu Whiskey.
Marion 732 Papa, contact approach 127.
Right, bending down and looking for a checklist is not the priority right now?
Nope. So, I know that I need my mixture rich. I have our approach lane checklist. We got our altimeter setting, DMMS 70 knots. And as long as we get all that stuff, we're not going to kill ourselves flying it.
Right.
You want this to be a touch and go or stop and go?
Let's do a stop and go.
Cool.
I really want to show
How fast we can stop it.
and really where you would end up.
Yep.
Pretending that the runway was half as long as it actually is. So in our scenario, we're attempting to touch down before the intersection of runway 22. Touchdown and stop, I should say.
100 in traffic, Cox 1790 Whiskey, 7 miles to the northwest, inbound on the RNAV for 13 Fernandina. I'd like to make a 3 mile and a short final call just since we are doing a straight in.
Yep. I don't see anybody on ADSB in the pattern. Jack's approach didn't tell us about anybody, they usually will. But
Yep.
We're listening, we're looking.
Sounds good. I'm having my head in and out, in and out.
Yep.
Alright, so 0.6 from our final approach fix, 2000. Bypass coming in. Start pulling back some power so we can slow down. Showing that 20 degrees of flaps.
I can see off the paper mill. There's definitely a very light wind out of the northeast.
Sounds good.
So it's going to be a stinky final approach.
Love it.
Stinky and slow final.
100 in traffic, Cox 1790 Whiskey, 3 miles to the northwest, bound on the RNAV for runway 13 Fernandina. 500 above our DA.
And it looks like it may have rained here.
Cool.
Runway looks a little shiny, so I'm guessing it might be a little wet, so we don't want to do hard braking.
Sounds good.
Something else to consider. All right,
Make sure we got
landing,
more aerodynamic braking than.
So we're landing on a short runway that might also be wet. All right, I don't hear anybody, I don't see anybody.
100 in traffic, Cox 1790 Whiskey, short final, runway 13, stop and go, Fernandina. Alright, we're 100 above our DA.
Alright, so again, at DA, we're going to pull the power to idle and try and land as close to the threshold as we can. We're doing actual instrument approach to a short field transitions here.
Alright, DA, pull back that power.
See if we can get it down to knots. And nice short field landing with minimal braking. See all those birds?
Yep. A lot of them.
So by flying his approach at 70 knots with 20 degrees of flaps, Caleb was able to make a landing and come to a complete stop in about 1,600 feet, which is a little longer than the published short field landing performance, but we didn't do full-on short field technique, so I think it worked out pretty well.
Jack's approach, Cox 1790 Whiskey, 2,800, climbing 3,000 with Bravo.
Number 9 Zulu Whiskey, turn right 260, vectors RNAV 14.
Right heading 260, vectors to RNAV 14, 1790 Whiskey. Getting vectors to final, so we'll maintain above 1,800 until MJAG, and then they'll tell us when to start sending. Well as our LPV minimums are going to be 293 for DA. Missed approach, climbing 1900, direct JVAG and hold. So I don't know if you like doing this, but I meant to do this earlier. I like to go to my flight plan, just make sure I have the right approach points in, so I don't have the wrong approach in.
Yeah.
Double checking.
Absolutely.
Cool. All looks good there.
All right, get on your scan, my friends. Fun, bonus prize today.
I know. This is fun. I love doing this. Good practice.
Well, it was fun while it lasted.
Power established. Start pulling back that power a little bit. Get that sync going.
Zulu Whiskey, contact tower, have a good one.
Contact tower, 79 Zulu Whiskey, good day.
739 Zulu Whiskey, Curtis Tower, report to southwest for the left base, runway 5.
Report southwest for the left base, runway 5, 739 Zulu Whiskey. Alright, so that means we'll be doing a right turn to the circle of 5, entering into a left base for runway 5. That's cool. Alright, our approach lane checklist, altimeter set, approach landing runway briefed. Set that DMS 70 knots, landing line on, make sure full rich, car repeat on as needed.
And we're going to do 80-10.
80-10.
So this is going to result in a faster airspeed. That power setting, I would bring it back to like 17 or 15. Basically same thing you'd use on an ILS. And remember, you're circling.
Yep. So we'll be going to the southwest. We'll make a right turn once we break out. So our minimums are going to be 500 feet.
And let's just circle at 1,000 feet at pattern altitude because
sounds good.
There's really no reason to go that low today since presumably people in the pattern at 1,000 feet.
And I'll start maneuvering to that left base. Great Tower, Sky 739 Zulu Whiskey, maneuvering to that left base, runway 5.
From Zulu Whiskey, roger, and left base, runway 5, and right clearance short funnel.
So after flying his approach at 80 knots with 10 degrees of flaps on the RNAV approach to runway 14, Caleb transitions to a nice normal VFR approach and landing at about 70 knots with the same flap setting and was able to make a nice crosswind landing on runway 5. So I hope that gives you guys a good idea of different approach configurations that you can use when you're flying IFR. If you like this video and this channel, please hit that like button and subscribe. And thanks again for watching.